Hi. Da, da, da. Subscribe to my channel. When we try to triangulate the sun, we find a lot like people in the olden days who used astrolabes found. We find that the results that we get indicate a small sun, 32-ish miles across, at a low height, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 miles up above the surface of the Earth. And the problem that we have is when you try to triangulate, when you try to localize its position, then it's difficult to take into account refraction, diffraction, the impact on light of the water vapor, the dust in our atmosphere, the molecules, the gases. And so it's really hard to pin down with any accuracy the actual location, the position of the sun outside our atmosphere. And this problem doesn't apply only to people who reject the globe model in favor of the flat earth theory model. This actually also applies to the people who subscribe to the globe model, except in that model, all these problems are swept under the rug and they're ignored. And everyone pretends that the sun is where we see it, 93 million miles away, but that we can triangulate it based on angles and that we'll always find it to be 93 million miles away. Which in fact, if you do it very carefully and precisely, you don't find that. And in one of my other videos that you can watch somewhere here, you can see the problems that we come up against if we try to use the globe model and calculate the distance to the sun using the knowledge that we now have. When these things were initially calculated, they didn't have access to all the data that we have. They didn't have the ability to Skype with someone on the other side of the world or 4,000 miles away. And so a lot of the information that we can now track more accurately, more precisely, starts to undermine a lot of these conclusions that we're taught as facts, such as the idea that the sun is 93 million miles away, which it is not. One thing that I've been meaning to do a video about, but I don't know if I'll ever get to it. Aristarchus is credited with determining angles between the sun and the moon and using this information to determine the distance to the moon, the distance to the sun, Venus. Da, da, da. The problem with this is that the sun and the moon emit different wavelengths of light. And so we see the sun as yellow, orange, red, and we see the moon as white, bluey, gray. And both of these are on different ends of the light spectrum, visual light spectrum. And what that means is that they actually have different angles of diffraction, different angles of bending when they go from one medium to a different one, or from a less dense medium to a more dense medium. So for example, if light actually were traveling through the vacuum of space and then hitting our atmosphere, it would then bend as it enters into the thin upper atmosphere of that globe model. And as it goes further into the thicker depths of our atmosphere, that bending would increase. And so when we see the sunlight, what we would be seeing in the globe model is the sun not actually where it would be located external to the atmosphere. And the thickness of the atmosphere would determine how much that light bends. But the color of the light would also determine how much that light bends. And so moonlight would bend at a slightly different angle. It would bend slightly, because we're told that the light of the moon is actually sunlight that's bounced off the moon and then towards the Earth. Well, it's not full spectrum light. And so we can see by the color of the light of the moon that it's different from the color of the light of the sun. And so whereas the sun has a golden quality to it, the yellow end of the spectrum, the moon doesn't. And so what this means is that the light from the sun and the light from the moon will bend at different angles in our atmosphere. However, there's more to take into account than that. Humidity in the atmosphere will also affect the extent to which, the degree to which the light bends. So if you're taking measurements for the sun and moon at one location on a humid day, and then you're comparing those to measurements made at a different location where it's a dry day, the anglings of the light will be different. And again, the angles won't be matching but different. They'll actually bend differently under different conditions, because if there's more humidity, then you have more ozone, then you will have more smog that settles into the lower atmosphere. So you'll have more coal particles, charcoal and carbon molecules, and you'll have a lot of other pollutants settling in that humid hot air. And so it changes the angle of refraction because it changes the density of the medium through which the light is passing.
So here's the straw going into the water. So here are the straws going into the water.
When we look at the straws in the water, preferably in focus, we see that there are differences in the distortion between the orange water and the blue water. Now that I've successfully located my prop, here is the, So the idea that you can somehow compare the angle between the sun and the moon and get any information about the actual location of the sun and the moon, well, that's just absurd, and scientists should know better, and so they shouldn't be perpetuating this childish fairy tale nonsense. It's silly. And so, where was I going with this? Da da da!
But can you do this?